Hey, today Wes and I are continuing the conversation we had on Sunday in overtime, where we were talking about the ever so popular topic of money. Money. You like that song, don't you?
It's awesome.
Who sings that song? I don't either. I'd say Led Zeppelin, but that
Probably wrong.
Yeah, I know. It's so bad. Anyways, hey, thanks for taking some time out in addition to Sunday and just continuing the conversation about money, because this is such an important topic. And I mean, it's part of everyday life. It's part of, families, it's part of legacies, it's part of, marriages, it's part of companies. It's just, money's a big deal. And it was such a big deal, Jesus talked about it a bunch.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so thanks again for joining. And I wanted to just start by talking about some stats that we didn't have time to cover on Sunday, but I just think it's so interesting to see like the climate of what's happening with money. And so just a couple to get our minds thinking and get us going is, according to Gallup, a third of American households they keep a budget, which means 2/3 don't. So the majority of Americans, when it comes to budget, which we were talking about,
right,
they don't do it. And then listen to this one. This is kind of amazing. Average Americans spend 4.5 hours a year looking at their finances and planning.
That's crazy to me.
Isn't that nuts?
Yeah.
I mean, this idea where you were talking about, hey, long-term planning, how important that is. Yeah. I mean, watching where your money's going, know where you're at. 4.5 hours a year, and money is such an important piece of our lives, and we give, according to Gallup, very little time. And then when it comes to like just some stuff in terms of debt and so on, Federal Reserve says Americans have over $1 trillion in credit card debt. There's 157 million Americans who have credit card debt to pay off, and 50% of Americans are concerned about their financial well-being. So, I mean, I could go on, but there's crazy amounts of stats to go like, hey, if there's a topic we need to talk about in terms of fresh starts and getting healthy, it's money.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. I talk about it every single day.
You do? Yeah. Does that ever get tiring? Are you ever like, let's talk about football?
What does get a little, it's almost comical, is the number one question I get, mostly for people who've barely known me for very long, but they find out that I'm in the financial field. They're like, should I buy gold? I mean, it's like Bitcoin. What do you think about Bitcoin? And it's just
that's their leading question.
It truly is. It's very funny. Or, hey, what's a market going to do?
Yeah.
What's and I get why they ask the questions,
sure.
but it's always just funny, and the lead in
gold
mixer conversations when they find out what I do for a living.
Well, my grandfather was big into gold. It's my mom's dad, and apparently he passed away about 10 years ago, but he used to bury gold in their yard. And,
really?
At their old house. So apparently, my mom and her brothers and all that said, like, when he passed away, they were like, there's tons of gold buried around his house. We just don't know where. So he was big into gold.
Where's his house?
In Colorado.
Okay. Do you know exactly where?
No, I don't know.
I'm up for a little prospecting.
Longmont area. That's about all I got there. Yeah, I was a little kid when I used to go, but yeah. Well, that's surprising. There you go. So that's the kind of lead-in stuff, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's pretty funny.
Well, hey, speaking of money, you know who else spoke about money a lot?
Jesus.
He did. And I shared some of those stats on Sunday, but it's wild to think about. Like, he had 3 years of ministry, age of 30 to 33. I mean, he had to talk about who God is. I mean, just think about trying to explain God and give some examples. I mean, that's a big task, and he did that really well. And then he had to explain like who he was and convince people that he's the Son of the living God. And then he had to talk about the fact like he's the designer. Like, he designed, Jesus, when it talks about him in the scripture, said like he was from the very beginning. In other words, he was the one who designed everything in terms of the world, in terms of you, in terms of me, our fabric. And so you're thinking, okay, you got 3 years to discuss all that. And yet in his dialogue, like, the number one practical subject he talked about is money, which, leads you to believe, to go like, okay, maybe we should talk about it, and maybe it's a bigger deal than we think in terms of our life. And perhaps maybe we were really confused about it, so he had to teach about it so much. Maybe that was part of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so I shared, for me, my personal thing, I said, Matthew 6:21, I just think it's crazy that Jesus said, hey, with the thing that you've been entrusted with, because you're stewards, is money, like, you can open the door to your heart to God to a greater degree by what you do with your money. I think that's just a really interesting paradox, because like, hey, I'm opening my hands, but yet I'm opening something else. I'm like receiving something. That's a really interesting teaching. But I'm curious, Wes, for you, what have you seen or think about when you think about Jesus' teachings? Which ones stand out to you?
Yeah, and we briefly hit this on Sunday together, but it astounds me how I get to have a ton of conversations. I mean, hundreds and hundreds every year about money with people that are in a wide variety of financial conditions. I mean, from people that have giant stacks of money, very small stacks of money, big incomes, small incomes. And I'll tell you that the happiest people I know, as it relates to their financial condition, regardless of where they sit there, and the people that are most at peace that I know, they have one common denominator, is that they view money as a stewardship rather than an opportunity for ownership. And these are people that are incredibly productive. They're also incredibly at peace, and they do a lot of good, and they're great stewards because they view money through that stewardship lens rather than through the ownership lens. And I love that because I think about what Jesus spoke about that, and Matthew recorded it in Matthew 25, starting in verse 14. He did the most famous parable, I think one of the most famous. I mean, there's some others up there, but even people who might not have been to church much in their life have probably heard the parable of the talents. And it's fascinating because there's so much richness in this one parable about money. And you look at the things that Jesus said. He was telling this parable, and always in all parables, just way of recap, there's always the God figure, and then there's the us inside of the parable. And in this one, he starts the parable out with, there was a master who was going on a long journey, and he gave to each of his servants. To one, it says he gave 5 talents. To another, he gave 2 talents. To another, he gave 1. And talents would represent just money, possession, something of great value that you need to steward and develop. But then he says something, and this gets overlooked a lot of times when I hear people talk about this particular parable. He says, to each he gave according to their own ability.
That's important.
To each he gave according to their own ability. And I think about that and how good our Heavenly Father is, and how, and if you believe there's a loving God that knows your name and has a great future and plan for you, which I do, how important that phrase is, that to each he gave according to their ability. And where this hits me is like, I have a new driver in the house. My son Gage is 16, and I know you experience.
I have a couple of them, and a third one who's like, "Hey, I think I am the driver."
Chomping at the bit. My 14-year-old daughter Abby thinks that already too. So
I mean, they're ready to take the racetrack and think, it's nutty.
It is nutty.
It's nerve-wracking.
And I think back, like he's driving the car around now and taking us places and people places, and I was just thinking back and laughing with Jamie the other day because I remember we were on a friend's ranch, and he had a gator out there, a little motorized gator, and my son said, "Hey, I want to go for a ride." I said, "No problem." And Gage managed to hit, when he was about 14 years old, the only vehicle in the entire several hundred acres out here.
Of course.
And and Jamie had this nice bump and indention in her bumper there, and we weren't mad. It's just one of those deals where it's like, okay, we need a little more experience here.
Right.
But I think about that because a lot of times, and just being honest with me, I think I want something, and I'm kind of frustrated that I don't have it yet. And then I just think about how often is God kind of looking at me like I look at my son. If my son at that age would go, "Hey, Dad, so I'm done with the gator. Can I jump in the car? I'm ready to take her for a spin." And it's like, well, because I'd love to bless him with the car, and eventually we did. But right then, it was beyond what he had the capacity to handle.
Right.
So master the gator, be faithful over the little. And then I can give you much more. And
Right. And as that parent, because you love them, you have that insight.
You bet.
You have the life experience, and you can say, hey, just like my son, their frontal lobes are not developed.
Right.
It is really clear to see it.
Right.
And you're like, and they're like, hey, if I can take the gator, I can take it. NASCAR's next.
Yeah.
And you're just sitting there going, I love your ambition.
Yeah.
But listen, I love you enough to speak into this and to give you exactly what you need.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Letting them, a good father recognizes that at some points in life, something that will eventually be a blessing would be a curse.
Yeah.
In that
at
moment.
that moment. Yeah.
And so, thankfully, he was faithful over his little, and now he's driving around. But as it relates to this parable of the talents, I really feel like in this first, just one line of the parable, he's saying, look, to each he gave according to their own ability.
That's good.
And it's why, some people are 5-talent people right now. Some people are 2-talent people, and some people are 1. And I think it's good because it almost speaks in, hey, don't get frustrated with what other people have going on.
Right.
Use that for inspiration.
Sure.
Right. But don't use it as a form of frustration. And I think it's easy to do that in that comparison. And so Jesus goes on, and the master leaves on his journey. And when he comes back, he takes an account. And it says he was gone for a while, takes an account, and 2 of the servants did really well. They basically doubled their master's money. And one of them had 5, he made 5 more, and the one who had 2 made 2 more. And he says something, again, I think that just so beautifully expresses what God has designed us for. He says, well done, good and faithful servants. You've been faithful over a few things. And now I want to make you ruler over many. Enter into my joy. And participate with me in my economy, in my ways of doing things, my ways of being, because you've been found faithful here. Now I'm ready to take you up a notch. Yeah. And now this extra talents that I want you to participate in are going to be a blessing, not a curse.
I love that. And that's that peace you talked about.
Yeah.
Like they're invited where you, as a 16-year-old, having that conversation with your dad on Sunday.
Absolutely.
You just desire people to experience that. And that's exactly like, hey, come into my kingdom, experience this. I have great, that peace for you.
Yeah. And it's such an opposing situation that the third servant had when he comes and takes account, because the third servant says, hey, I knew you to be a hard man. I knew what you just wanted money. I knew you reaped where you hadn't sown. I knew you gathered where you hadn't gathered seed. And I was afraid. And so I took what you gave me, your 1 talent. I don't know why you gave it to me, but I took it and I hid it. And now here, take back what's yours. And what the master's response would denote is how that is so not the God's best for our lives. Because you knew it. You knew I was a tough man. You knew I gathered where I hadn't scattered seed. And you knew that I would demand back mine plus some. But you hid it and you didn't do anything with it. You didn't even put my money into the bank where I could get 0.25% interest rate. You did nothing with it. You should have at least done the minimum thing. I mean, don't bury it in the ground. Don't not steward what I've just placed in your hands. Steward it to the best of your capacity. Don't run away from it because you don't understand why I gave it to you.
Right. And now, when you say that, Wes, so for me, I get there's this weird, it is a paradox. It's so paradoxical because it's like everything in us wants to do that, like the third servant, to go like, I can't let it go. It's my security. It's my hope. Right. It's, oh my gosh, if I let it go, what's going to happen to me? Like tomorrow, the fears of tomorrow are now here today. And it freaks us out, and it puts us in this fear, which the third servant was full of fear.
Yes.
And so all you can do is fear is what you talked about on Sunday, is be an owner and just say, hey, my hands are clenched. There's no way I'm going to let any of this go. And, I love that point. That's your point, because that's a real human thing.
You bet.
I think we all feel that because we've maybe put in our ultimate security in our money versus just saying, oh, money's a security. Yeah. It's just not our ultimate security. Right. Our ultimate security is our Heavenly Father, which we can try things then and go, like, God, I'm going to trust you.
Yes, absolutely. And it's this, we talked about it on Sunday, that it is a great tool, what I'm giving you, but is a horrible master. I'm the master, and that's what he's inviting. So I'm going to give you this tool because I've given you what you can handle. But when you choose not to use the tool, and you choose to use it in a way that I've not invited you to use it, you're using something of mine in a way that is just not in line with my economy, the way I set things up. So the outcome is never going to be that good for you.
Right.
And then I love the ending, which is so unpopular, maybe from an economic standpoint, is. He said, take the one who had 1 and give it to the guy who has 10. Yeah. And which, if we're all being fair, we should proportionately divide that amongst, right. But he didn't do that. He said, no, because listen, you've proven yourself. I'm gonna give it to you. And that's what stewardship is. Stewardship is understanding this is not mine. Right. And there's an expectation here that I'm going to do good with this. I'm going to do good according to your ways of doing good, your ways of doing and being, which is why Jesus, I believe, talks so much about money, because over and over again he showed us different ways that are kind of his economic belief system, his economic strategy to do good, to have good stewardship, so that we can experience that well done.
Yeah.
And be able to participate in his joy with him, not just working for him, away from him, or trying to own it and figure it out ourselves.
Right. I love that. That's great. Hey, you're a preacher, man. Look at you. You took that verse and just, explained it well. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love that. And I think, part of, Jesus talked quite a bit on that idea about, like, we really are stewards. Like, God it belongs to him. Everything under the sun belongs to him. He just entrusts it for, our 70, 80, 90, 100 years.
Yeah.
And ultimately, a steward's always accountable. And we will be accountable with how we handled our money. And he kept trying to paint that picture to go, guys, here's what's coming, here's what's coming, here's what's coming, here's the kingdom of God. Yeah. And I love that he did that because he's really for us. And just like a good father is like for us, I mean, Jesus is absolutely for us.
Absolutely.
So that's great insight. Well, Wes, as you, one of the things you said on Sunday is you talked about this idea of peace, this idea of like, some would even kind of say a synonym to that's happiness. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to money, there's a lot of like conventional thinking that would say money equals happiness. The more money I have, the happier I am. In fact, when I was working at Dell, my boss was trying to motivate us and said something like popular to contrary to belief, money does lead to happiness, which I was like, isn't that like what contrary to belief? I think most people believe that.
that is what
we, so I was a little confused by her message, but she was just trying to motivate us. Hey, go out and sell computers. The more you sell, the more money you make, the happier you'll be.
Sure.
And there's this connection with happiness and money, and I've personally experienced it. Like I've if I get a little extra, like there's something inside of me that lights up, and I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? And buy some parts for the Mustang or whatever it is. And I get that, but then it goes away really quick.
Right.
And then it's like I need more, and it feels like it never stops. So for me, I'm going, okay, let's do the research. Like, does science actually say that money leads to happiness? And so there's so much research out there, and for somebody tuning in or listening or watching, what have you, I would highly encourage you to do the research because it's fantastic what it says, and it's hard to hear because it is a little bit contrary to popular belief. And one of the things I ran across was a study it's called the Science of Generosity Initiative. It was done at the University of Notre Dame. I think it was over several years. They were looking at generosity, looking at all the different practices, like what happens when somebody actually is a steward and open their hands. Mm-hmm. And this was not a religious study. This was just a study in general on generosity. And here's the conclusion of their whole study. They said the more generous Americans are, the more happiness, health, and purpose in life they enjoy. And then it continues and says the association between generous practices and personal well-being is strong and highly consistent across a variety of kinds of generous practice and measures of well-being. And so I read this and I was like, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Like, this idea, again, it's a paradox, like to go, my happiness isn't tied in so much in, how much I get, like that just feels temporary, which there's something unauthentic about something that's here today, like gone tomorrow. Mm-hmm. But real authentic happiness, the real joy and peace is when we open our hands and we're generous. And if you're not a Christian that's generous to organizations around the world, if you are a Christian that's generous to the local, body, to the church, and going, hey, the church is, as Jesus promised, the hope of the world.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to, that leads to happiness, which is what. So when you hear that, what do you think about, and what thoughts come to your mind?
I completely agree, and I really do think it goes back to the stewardship idea, where as stewards, God hardwired in us this desire to help other people. Mm-hmm. Really did, and when your focus is just on me, and a lot of times if I'm thinking the core of my happiness is I just need to get a little bit more, mm-hmm. get a little bit more, and then I will be. You're almost not even generous. You're almost like, well, I need more. In fact, what you have, I could use some of that. It's like a reverse deal, but it's such a small life. There was a Gallup poll study years and years ago now, and it was fascinating because they asked everybody one question, and this was like there were 11,000 people in this study, and they asked them all the same question, and it was a variety of different economic backgrounds. I mean, people that were making a little, people that were making a whole lot, mm-hmm. and at first it appeared like the answers were all over the map. And here's the question: it was, hey, what does it take for me to be happy and rich? Mm-hmm. And that was the question, and they just left it at that, one-liner.
Wow.
And so what was interesting is, while at first the answers appeared to be all over the map, eventually a pattern would emerge. But the way that that had emerged started to be this, is that you had the people that made around $30,000 a year and less, and they said, what I need to be happy and rich financially is I need to make an annual income of around $70,000 to $75,000.
Wow. Okay.
And so, you know, people that are listening that have made 70 to 75,000, they would probably have some news for the people that answered that way.
They'd say, not so.
No, it's not. It's not 75. And then what was fascinating, they moved up to the people that were in that bracket around, you know, somewhere in that $75,000 range. And they said, it's not 75,000. They said, it's 120. If you had 120,000, then you would absolutely be happy and rich. And it was fun. It just kept going up. The further up the income ladder you were, you always asked for about double what you were making now was the deal. And so the real answer, because while economically they appeared different, if you're looking for money to be the source of your happiness, then the real answer there was, I need more than I currently have.
Right.
And the answer to that will never change, no matter how much you have.
And you're never going to get there.
You're thinking, because I'm here, and it's not meeting all of my needs. It's not satisfying me.
Right.
So maybe what I need is a little bit more.
Yeah.
You know, and then I'll get to that place.
Gosh, yeah. It's so, and you know, again, because I'm the preacher, I guess, you know, as you're speaking, I can't help but think of Solomon, where he's like, it's a chasing after the wind.
Chasing after the wind.
Like, you're just not going to catch it. And it also, I had a quote that, you know, in prep for our podcast, I was thinking about, and Jim Carrey, the famous movie actor, and, you know,
I've heard of him.
Ace Ventura. Have you seen that before?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so many lines. And my boys, like, I'm trying to introduce him to that. Like, hey, Ace Ventura, and they're like, the pet detective. Wow, Dad, it's awesome. So there's, you know, we have some lines going in our house. But he says this, and I thought, man, so insightful. He says, I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer. So if you're 30, the answer's 70. Not the answer.
Yeah.
If you're 70, the answer's 125. Not the answer. 125, it's, you know, it's just, he just wishes people could get to the pinnacle of whatever they perceive will give them happiness, because ultimately it may for a moment, but then it dissipates.
Yeah. I love that, because it just goes so closely with one of my favorite things to talk about, and what we spend a little time on Sunday, is this idea that when it comes to fulfillment, you and I and everybody else is going to run out of time and money before they run out of all the ideas and opportunities they could go pursue.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's one of these things. We all have this gap that in its right state, I think it's a really, really good thing. This gap between where I am and where I want to be, and the gap between where I am and where I want to be, no matter how much money I make, no matter how much I accomplish, no matter how much success I have, never goes away. It just moves. So if I'm delaying my happiness till I'm on the other side of it, I'm choosing to never be happy, and I'm get to that thing, and there's always a next thing.
Right.
And the tricky part about that, I think, is that it's good in its natural state, meaning that God created us to make today better than it was yesterday, and tomorrow better than it is today. We were built to make things beautiful. And in all areas of our life that we care about, our relationships, our money, our physical health, our professions that we engage in, all these big areas that matter to us in life, that if we were writing out the future of our life and telling our story, we could come up with some things that we believe could be better. But that never ends, because you're never done. So it's not about like not being content. It's not, the absence of ambition has nothing to do with navigating this contentment. It's about the condition of your spirit as you navigate the gap between where I am and where I want to be. And in its first state, I mean, this is where progress comes from. It's where faith lives. You know, faith in Hebrews is defined as the substance of things we are hoping for, the evidence of things we've not yet seen. And so it's good to have that. The problem is it's really tough to navigate it. And when we're looking out here, take the time to appreciate and take the time to have peace right where we are as we're reaching. You know, another great Solomon that 5 weeks ago or so we talked about was that better one handful in life with tranquility, which just means peace, than two handfuls with the strife and chasing after the wind. You know, and if we are we got to get everything here and not taking time to enjoy where we are and away to where we're going, The issue becomes we're just never going to be happy,
right,
because there's always a better, there's always a next. But it's so easily tilted that way if we're not careful. And money's the big one. Money's a huge one in that.
Oh, huge. Yeah, and in our culture, it's like go. You know, it's what's the next thing? What's the next iPhone, next whatever is coming out? You got to go and keep up. And that last statement you just made made me think of like this idea of just today, like. Just be still today. Appreciate what you have today. Yeah. Like look around, just pause, maybe 5 minutes a day. Just go like, wow, look at like my house. Look at like my dishes. Look at like my car. And it may not be like, oh, all the things you do, but look at what you have today. And in that, there's happiness. And look at the relationships we have.
Yeah.
And there's actually a study. And I quoted this when I did that series about what makes you happy.
Yeah.
And so speaking of happiness, and we'll kind of button it up with this, and then I know there's something else I wanted to ask you about. But the Harvard Study of Adult Development is the longest running, most comprehensive study ever done on happiness. So if you're like, okay, who knows or who has the science or the most objective data when it comes to happiness, what's going to lead to it? It's this study. And so at the time I talked about it, it was a 75-year study, so I think it's like, 85 years at this point, where they're following like, all these different people and throughout their careers, throughout their relationships, throughout everything, money, good, bad, all the kind of stuff. And the ultimate question, what leads to happiness? And here's the whole conclusion of the study. And there's TED Talks about this, so if somebody's tuning into the podcast, they can go watch the TED Talks, and it's awesome. It says the conclusion, close relationships, more than money or fame, are what keep people happy throughout their lives, the study revealed. That's it. So I think that idea of just going like sometimes in the midst of the pursuit of more and more money, more security, I'm going to feel better. Ultimately, if we just paused throughout the day and just looked around and went, wow, look at my relationship with my son.
Yeah.
Look at my relationship with my wife or with my husband. Look at my relationship with my friends. Ultimately, the more intentional we get with that, that's where happiness is going to be found, not necessarily with money.
Yeah, I heard a great quote that really complements that. It said that we'll never be happier than the quality of our relationships.
Oh, yeah. It's great.
Because you can have a ton of money, but if those relationships aren't there to enjoy it with them, it really is just meaningless.
Right. And if the pursuit of that money came at the expense of those relationships, that's ultimately what's going to make the biggest impact on happiness. That's really good. Okay, so I know you were talking about a question that you were asking a lot of people before this podcast, and you were like, hey, what, and so talk more about that, and then, I think this will kind of wrap up our time.
Yeah, it was fascinating. So, know we were leading up to having a lot of deep conversations about money. I started asking, I asked everybody on my team, I asked my wife, I asked a bunch of people, hey, if you could go back in time and tell the 15-year-old version of yourself something about money that you just think is a game changer, that it is a non-negotiable about life. There were a lot that they gave me depending on the person, and some really, really good stuff. But the number one thing by far, like not even close, was you need to be clear about the role of money in your key relationship, meaning your partner, your spouse, your significant other, in advance of really getting deep in together.
So before marriage, before marriage, hook, line, and sinker?
Yep.
Make sure.
One person said, and make sure you never buy a house with somebody that you don't know anything about their financial future, or before you're married, she said.
Yeah,
so
that's good.
But yeah, because you come in and you've got expectations, and she's got expectations, or he's got expectations, and if you don't talk about what those are, you can think things are going great, and the other person's going, not meeting my needs. This isn't the way it's done. This isn't the way we make progress in our financial life. So it's just, but what's crazy? It's a conversation most people never have prior to marriage.
Yeah. In fact, there's some stats on this too. I love reading stats and studies and all that stuff. But 61% of women, and ladies, I'm not picking on you, I'm just saying what the data says, is that 61% of ladies would rather talk about death and their funeral than they would money.
Wow.
And they go on in the study to talk about the reason why is because there's so much emotional attachment to the idea of security, to the idea of empowerment, to the idea of trust, to the idea of status. And money is so emotionally connected to that, which means that the converse of that, the opposite of that, is like if you have a lot of money, well, then you start feeling these things maybe temporarily depending on your financial status. But if you don't have a lot of money, you don't feel these things. And so it gets so convoluted because emotions get all involved in that. And then at the end of the day, then it becomes a very emotional discussion that like, man, I don't want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And I see that dynamic with Jill and I. I mean, I'm telling you and I know this is hard to believe, but Jill and I fight. Yeah. And some of
marital adjustment sessions.
Yeah,
that's what sounds better.
See, you're so nice.
That's right.
Yeah, I love the way you said that. So, yeah, we have these marital adjustment sessions. Is that what you said? Yeah, sessions?
Yeah, sessions.
Okay.
That's good.
So we'll have these things. And
Jamie and I have never had a fight. We just have those.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, that is a really fun way to think about it. And so we'll have these, but they're about money and just getting on the same page. And it's so difficult to think about, like, how do we talk well about money, especially men and women?
Yeah.
Because I think, and this may be unpopular to say, but at the end of the day, I think there's kind of this inherent design by God for men to provide. Yeah, women can provide too. I think that's wonderful. But I think it's like one of the makeups of us is to go, hey, from this primal thing to go, hunt and gather so we can feed our families. And there's something in us about that. And if we're not doing that well, or maybe the financial status isn't well, who wants to talk about something that doesn't feel great,
right,
and brings up these insecurities and brings up part of our design? And then I think for a woman, so much of that is, when it comes to money, so much of that is with security. Now, I know there are exceptions to all this, but I'm just saying general observations. There's so much security in that. And so, like, my security's tied up in that. My identity as a man's tied up in that. And then you try to get these two people to talk about a highly emotional topic of money. And then we wonder, like, I wonder why it doesn't go well. And that is a really hard dynamic. So is there anything you would just say, like, that is helpful to begin to have conversations about money, and kind of what the advice was?
Yeah, I think it can be really simple if you want. Like, typically, Buck, and I don't know how it is in your house, but typically one person in the house really loves the budget, loves numbers, loves to really dig in, and the other person absolutely is on the opposite side of the fence. They hate it. They don't want to talk about it. But what you can do, so you don't necessarily have to be the one that does all those things, right? When you're one of the best things we regularly do about money is identify, where are we right now? Like, what's the current condition that we find ourselves in? Are we surviving? Are we stable? Are we thriving? Because one thing, regardless if you hate talking about money or love talking about money, I know something about you, and I know something about me. We want to thrive.
Yeah.
Like, ultimately, that'd be a great
Absolutely.
thing. And the step in between surviving and thriving is stability. We want to, so wherever we are, we want those things. So I think it's always good if you can start with, hey, what are our future hopes and dreams? Where do we want to land as a team? That's
really good.
Because when you can focus out there, the why, this is what we'll get this because our life will be like this together, and then say, now in light of that, where are we and what do we need to do as a team to this month get ourselves one step closer to that ultimate outcome that we both want to get towards?
Right.
One of the things that I found early on in our marriage, Jamie and I, that I mean, it was just so impactful for us, is we would regularly, every 3 months or so, get away. And we'd get away, take a fun trip somewhere,
Sure.
And get a little bed and breakfast in Fredericksburg or something like that. And then we would just, the first hour of the next morning when we got there, we would just write out. We'd write out, hey, what does life look like if things are really hitting on all cylinders 3 years from today? And we just kind of dream a little bit, and we do it separately. And then we'd sit and talk about it together. I'd say, it wasn't an exhaustive exercise. It was just because it's fun to dream about things that excite you in the future.
Yeah.
And so you learn a lot about each other. And then we just spend a little time saying, all right, well, so in light of that, what are the things that you and I could regularly do in exercise to actually get ourselves closer to it by design? And then, end up, because if we don't do that, I can end up at a place that I think it's great.
Yeah.
And I'm making decisions, and all the time it's like on the other side going, I don't know. Why is he doing that? When you're a team, you know where you're going.
Yeah.
And you agree on it, and then you back into, all right, well, what practically can we do about it? And then when disputes come up, which they obviously will, it's just
those marriage adjustment
those marital adjustment sessions.
Yeah.
You can go back to we both want this, and right now we're here, and so we thought the good plan to get there would be this.
I love that.
And with money, I mean, honestly, money's there should be no mystery.
Right.
With money,
yeah.
right? It never words like it seems like, or it seems like you, and it seems like me, or I don't know where all the money is. Those are like solvable problems pretty easy. And I think a lot of fights and disagreements come from one, not knowing where we're trying to go together, and then backing into where we are and what plan we're going to have to do that. But then just regularly talking and identifying our location. Yeah.
I think there's so much energy around that's positive, that would, lead people to go, man, let's dream together. Let's, these aspirations, these what could be. And then, that gives a lot of energy to the relationship, and it gives some alignment in terms of communication and the why. And I think that's awesome. I think two things I would just add to that, and I think these are communication things that work across the board, if it's money or whatever, but especially when it's like harder subjects. And unfortunately, I've learned a lot of this in counseling. So this is some of the, communication techniques. But I've heard that whole concept of, hey, seek to understand before being understood. In other words, I have 10 points I want to tell you about money, in my opinion. Yeah. But hey, let me ask you some questions. Let me seek to understand you. And I think one of the greatest ways, especially from a man and a woman dynamic, or just any dynamic, is to feel loved, to feel heard, to feel like there's interest, like you are discovering me, is to seek to understand them. Like, hey, tell me more about, what you think about when it comes to money. Hey, tell me about the security and where are you at with that? And how much security do you feel like, money has an impact? Tell me about your childhood and like what you experienced with your mom and dad, and how did that impact, the way you view money? The more questions I think somebody can ask to go, man, I really want to discover them. I want to understand where they're coming from. I want to understand their childhood, because so much of that impacts our marriage relationship, or our relationship we have. And I think seeking to understand before seeking, hey, I want you to understand me, is one of the keys to success in communication, especially when it comes around an emotional topic like money. And then the other thing I would just add is this, and again, another big counseling point, is oftentimes I will say things in a way that may tick you off, or may cause, that emotional response. But at the end of the day, if you can realize that I am saying something, I just may not be saying it the way you like it, and look for that in the conversation. Yeah. And that requires a lot of security as an individual. That requires you to have your feet firmly on the floor and go, my identity is in Christ. I know who I am. To be able to go, listen, I know he or she is not saying it in a way that feels conducive, is a way that feels palatable, but they are saying something. And when you look for that piece to go, what are they saying? Especially in money, like, hey, you never keep a budget, or you never do. Okay, they're saying it the wrong way. I get it. But what are they saying? And getting to the bottom of that and being willing to be patient enough to listen for that, I'm just telling you, that is a key for alignment and communication.
I love that, because I think that is one of the best expressions of love, right? Is you hope the best. You believe the best. Yeah. I'm gonna give you the benefit of the doubt on that, what you're saying and how you're saying it. I'm not going to take the road of, well, you know what, they just always come down on me. Instead of going, you know what, there's something in there, and I want to seek to understand what that is, so that we can move forward in a positive direction together, because I know ultimately that's what we both want.
I love that. Well, Wes, thank you so much for this conversation.
Great.
Multiple conversations.
Yeah, it's been wonderful.
From Sunday and this. So I know that's a lot of time, a lot of energy, and just a shout out to Jamie and your family, because I know they're kind of going, hey, what are you doing? Are you working? Provide the money here. Well, I know, Jamie works as well. So just to make sure, give her a shout out. But thank you guys for the investment, and just for really loving and leading people well.
Thank you for the opportunity. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, you got it. Well, hopefully this is helpful to take a step and experience a fresh start financially. So if you didn't catch Sunday, I really want to encourage you to go back and listen to the conversation Wes and I had, and take some practical steps, do something different to experience a fresh start. Thanks again, man.
Thanks.